Hello and welcome to Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. We don't have Glenville today as we continue the series on things to do before we say I do because I'm away from home and we're not able to record together. So today I want to talk about the importance of processing abandonment before we say I do. I was speaking today to two presentations, and as when I talk about trauma, sometimes I like to spend some time on abandonment because it's so important. There's so many there's so many places where abandonment and the impact of abandonment shows up in our lives, in our relationships, that sometimes we don't give it as much attention as it's needed. And we see it play out. And when I say abandonment, I don't only mean physical abandonment. I don't only mean a parent leaving. And there's a whole series of abandonment on this podcast. If you go back and look, a couple of months ago, I did abandonment. I think maybe it was about November, December time that I did abandonment. And so there's a whole series on it, but I want to talk about it today in relation to before you get married or before you go in a serious relationship or as you're in that serious relationship and it's becoming deeper. And that's one of the places where abandonment will show up where we'll say people have commitment issues, and sometimes it's not necessarily because people struggle with commitment. They might want to commit, but every time the relationship appear like it's going deeper, like we need to go to this next level, the abandonment feelings will rear its head, which will make you step back and sabotage the process. When somebody might want to be vulnerable, that can be scary when you experience abandonment, whether it's physical abandonment with a parent leaving or it's emotional abandonment where people were there, but they weren't present, they weren't available, they weren't able to hear your stories or to, they weren't, they, there was nobody to connect to. And so that feeling of being on your own, of having to look after yourself means that sometimes emotions are not acknowledged. There was nobody to witness it with you. So when somebody wants to come close, then what might happen when we experience abandonment is we want to run in the other direction because we can't manage the emotion that goes along with somebody wanting to come closer to us. And so it can feel so overwhelming. And that overwhelming sense of that overwhelming feeling, it's so all encompassing that we feel it's going to take us over. You might feel like it's going to take you out. You're not sure what to do with it, how to deal with it. And people have different coping strategies that are probably all unhealthy coping strategies to deal with abandonment. And so then you'll back off and you might start another relationship and another one and another one and another one, because every time it's coming close to might the relationship wanting to go to another level, or another level, you might run away. So if you're having many different relationships, you're just about to start another one, and you're realizing that the ones that I had before never really got anywhere, sit and think about why. If you look in your past, is there abandonment there? Whether physical abandonment or emotional abandonment? Were there people to talk to about your problems? Were there people to listen to you? Or as we discussed today, one of the things that came up today was that sometimes we're from cultures where we were trained to not cry. We were trained to not acknowledge our emotions. And there's something significant that happens when we were trained to not acknowledge our emotions. It means that while I can listen, I am trained to not acknowledge how I feel. And when we're trained to not acknowledge how we feel, to ignore how we feel, we're going to really be challenged to listen to how other people feel because we're trained to shut down our own. And sometimes when we shut down pain, the problem with that is we don't experience laughter and joy either. And so yeah, there's a lot to understand about yourself before you go into a relationship. because some of the things that makes relationships successful is your ability to hear your partner, your ability to be with them, your ability to sit with them with whatever that they're happening, the ability to turn towards and to meet them where they are. And when you don't have the capacity to do that because of your experiences, then it's going to impact on the relationship. Because one of the things I know is we were created to connect. It doesn't matter where we're from, it doesn't matter what cultures we come from. God created all of us to connect. We are not islands. We can't live on our own, and we can't exist without each other. We need each other. There's something that it happens when we connect. There's a release of hormones that are happy in our bodies that helps us to function better as humans. So connection is not for people from the West, it's for everybody in this world. Granted, sometimes we're from cultures that connection was not looked upon well, and so we learn how to not do it, but it doesn't mean that we didn't need it, and it doesn't mean that the people in our lives now don't need it, because one of the things is our context is different. So before you go into a serious relationship, look at the things that you experience. Be comfortable with the things that you experience. Be comfortable with all of your stories. All of the stories that are revealed to you, be comfortable with it. Because when you are comfortable with all of your stories, it makes it easier for you to talk about it to yourself, to other people, so that you can see the places where it's impacting. Sometimes we're really precious about our stories. And I mean precious, like we feel like if we process its lack of loyalty, if we talk about it in any other light than positive, it's lack of loyalty, sometimes to our families, to our cultures, to our caregivers. It's lack of loyalty if we see it in any other light than a positive light. It's not lack of loyalty, though. It's just honesty. And it doesn't mean that you're not loving and kind. It doesn't mean that you become a bad daughter or son. It doesn't mean that you have sold out on your culture. It doesn't mean any of those things. When you're being honest with where you are and how you feel, it just means that you are having an understanding of you and the you that you bring to relationships, because we take ourselves to the relationship. So as we go back to the title of abandonment, know whether or not that's your story. And so it's important to process abandonment before relationships, because it helps you to see the places where it's impacting. Abandonment can create deep wounds that affects connection. It affects our ability to connect with others, to have trust in relationships, to have authentic relationships, to be vulnerable, to share, to listen, to witness, to be available for anybody for anything. We will exist alongside, but when we experience abandonment, it really makes us struggle to give ourselves to anybody. And for relationships to become successful, we have to learn how to do that. It's something that we have to learn how to do. So think about your story. Did a parent leave? Did your caregiver leave? And again, it doesn't mean that the people who look after you, if they left physically, that they weren't great, kind people. It just means that the parent, the caregiver that you needed, that weren't there, and that you had to learn how to cope on your own. As adults, we might understand it, we might have rational explanations for it, but as children, we didn't, we couldn't, we can't. And so that's why it's important. So were they were they not there emotionally? When you had a need, there was nobody to talk to about that need. So you struggled on your own because there was no one there. It's important to know that too. And to see throughout your life, how have I been in relationships? Honestly, how am I in relationships? Sometimes it's important that we get feedback from other people who we've been friends with for a long time and we feel safe with. Ask for some feedback. How do you experience me in relationship? Am I available? Do I listen? Do you feel like I have heard you when you've talked about something that is hurtful to you? Do I listen or do I shut it down? When I'm listening, do you feel like I'm present? I'm hearing you. Do you feel like my responses have been empathetic? Or which areas do you feel I need to grow in? And be prepared to hear the feedback. Sometimes the feedback might be a little bit might leave you a little bit tender. If there are people who love you and they're honest, that honesty can sometimes be hard to hear. But if you that's a place where we can grow. When we get the feedback, when we listen to it, when we sit with it, we pray through it, we ask God for direction around it, it really does help give us clarity about ourselves because we don't know everything about ourselves. And it really does help us to grow. So process your abandonment story, learn your abandonment story for you, understand it, be with it, so before you go into a committed relationship, so that you're understanding who you're taking, and share your story with the people that you're going to go into relationship with, because that will help them to have an understanding of you and it will deepen the connection. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.